Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Monday, May 22nd. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 103 days. The game against Michigan in 187 days. Mark Givler and Kevin Noon wrapping up their southern swing. A big trip lasted more than a week down south. They have been just churning out a ton of content at BuckeyeHuddle.com. All told, I think they're going to end up with about 24 players, major targets from all across the South, all of whom are involved with Ohio State to one degree or another. Great insight, great analysis from those two guys all week long last week. So we're going to kind of start wrapping things up a little bit on that southern swing with Kevin today. He joins me from an undisclosed location somewhere in Georgia. Kevin, I guess let's start with a guy who is currently committed to Ohio State, but there's been a little bit of concern from Buckeye fans about Jeremiah Smith, five-star wide receiver, number one wide receiver in the class, number one player in the class, depending on the source you look at. So the quality of player is not a concern. Will he stick as an Ohio State commit has sort of been the concern for Buckeye fans recently. What did you learn after talking to Jeremiah Smith?
Short answer, he's going to stick, in my opinion. Of course, it's recruiting and things can change, and I think what it would take for Jeremiah Smith not to be a member of the class is the departure of Ryan Day and or Brian Hartline. He is sold on the Ohio State coaching staff. He is sold on the offense that Ohio State runs. He is sold on Brian Hartline, the developer. And it would take something to that level for him to make a change. There is this relatively thin narrative out there that Dylan Raiola means the world to him, which is just not true, in my opinion. These kids, when you're locked in, sometimes want to have a little bit of fun and say, oh, well, maybe I'm not locked in. And, I think there's a little bit of that, but I think that what Dylan Raiola means to Jeremiah Smith is being way overblown in an attempt to sell subscriptions and page views and everything else. And here I am, I guess, on the other side trying to attempt to sell page views and subscriptions and everything else and tell you that just isn't the case. Yes, he's going to take some official visits to Georgia and other places, but I'm really not concerned. I spoke to some people around South Florida while I was down there, and they told me don't be concerned either, that it would take kind of that worst case scenario for Jeremiah Smith to back off of there. So, when you have that Georgia fan attack you on social like I have here for a lot, bless your heart and just go about your day. I'm not as good at turning the other cheek and have engaged a little bit more than I should, but for now I feel very confident in Jeremiah Smith signing with Ohio State.
And you mentioned the name Dylan Raiola there. If people are not following recruiting super closely and think, that name sounds familiar, why does that name sound familiar? Number one quarterback in the class of 2024 was committed to Ohio State last summer, decommitted a few months back, and is now committed to Georgia. So that's why that name sounds familiar. Ohio State, of course, has their own quarterback for the class of 2024 already in Aaron Noland. He's out of the state of Georgia. So a little bit of quarterback shuffle there, but everyone seems to have, the music has stopped and everyone seems to have a seat. So that's where Dylan Raiola's name may sound familiar to you. Another name that may sound familiar to you is Jojo Trader. He's listed as a wide receiver out of South Florida. He might end up playing cornerback if he comes to Ohio State. Kevin, I guess, another top 50 prospect, great athlete. Is he a wide receiver for the Buckeyes? Is he a cornerback for the Buckeyes? And if he does end up with the how likely is it that he actually ends up with the Buckeyes?
You get Jojo Trader in and you just figure it out later. He's 6 foot. I mean, I think he's a tremendous wide receiver, but he could be a top 10 type of cornerback when his NFL draft day comes around if he pans out the way I would expect him to. Um, Ohio State has some work to do on that one, and it's not a matter of Ohio State making a misstep or Ohio State not recruiting him well. It's just a matter of Miami's done a really good job, and some other schools have done a really good job. But, he may have 5 or 6 schools that he's talking about. I kind of see it as Miami, Ohio State, the field. It's going to be a matter of being able to beat out Miami for his services. Now, if you are a JoJo Trader fan and an Ohio State fan, you should probably be rooting against Miami this season. I think that if Miami has a little bit of a meh season, I think that could have an effect there. As for what position, again, I think that you bring him in at wide receiver. If that's what he wants to come in as, you bring him in at wide receiver and you see. I mean, he could maybe really shine and take off there, or he could come to Ohio State as a wide receiver and see where the room is, and within a year say, well, let me give this cornerback a chance. And Ohio State certainly is not a school that is against moving players around, and Ohio State certainly has brought players in at one position, probably knowing that they're going to move them in a year or two. So we'll see. But does Ohio State land him? I don't know. I don't know. I think that one is going to be a little bit more challenging.
All right, and another one where we probably don't know the answer to that question yet is Malachi Tony. He is a 2026 wide receiver. One of these guys who is on the radar very, very early, just because of how athletic and just what an incredible player he is. He's out of American Heritage High School down in South Florida. That's a school where Ohio State has pulled some talent over the years. What did you guys learn about Malachi Tony? He's someone that I think we saw at a camp last summer, and I think he may have also made a visit last fall, if I'm remembering correctly. But I remember when we saw him being very impressed with him. What did you guys see down there?
Yeah, that was a player that Mark got to go see. We had to split up at one point. I went to St. Thomas Aquinas to go see Jordan Lyle and the famous interview that didn't record, and he went to American Heritage to go see Malachi Tony. But of course, we traded notes after, and I like Ohio State's position with Malachi Tony. It's a ways away. He is a 2026, as you mentioned. A lot of things could happen between now and then, and it's a lot to ask to sit there and say that Brian Hartline is not going to have moved on by then potentially, and that's not to put out bulletin board material, but that's just to talk about where his stock is. But Malachi Tony really likes Ohio State. Malachi Tony certainly, I think something that would benefit is if Brandon Ennis were to go out and have a big start to his career. I think that that's something that would resonate very well with Malachi Tony. I mean, he's a guy that has a lot of speed. He has a great catch radius. He's still a guy who has several years of development. So what could he be by the time that we're really looking at 26s front and center? I think he's going to be really special, and I really like Ohio State's chances there, but he's going to be peppered by Miami, Florida State, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, everybody for years. So you're right. We can't put anything on the 26 column at this point. And truthfully, I wouldn't want, if I'm Ohio State, to play defense on him for 2 years. We can sit there and talk about Jonte Gilbert, the corner out of Atlanta. Ohio State's had to play defense on him for almost a year now at this point. He's a 25. He's going to have to play defense a lot longer. And I think the consensus is that odds are better that he's not going to end up signing with Ohio State than he is. So, let Malachi Tony go through the process, and let's revisit it in 25 and, play defense for a year as opposed to playing defense for 3 years. That's no good.
Yeah, what's the old Urban Meyer line about early commitments? It just means you're in their top three. That tends to be how it has gone over the years, and that's probably only going to be more true as NIL and the portal and all that fun new stuff sort of changes the landscape of recruiting a little bit. But I did want to talk to you about one guy who is purely on the defensive side of the ball. We talked about Jojo Trader, maybe could end up there. Jaden Jackson, that he is a interior defensive lineman out of IMG Academy, class of 2024. That's a spot where you have to reload that cupboard every single year, and the interior of that defensive line, edge rushers as well. But the Buckeyes have gotten a lot of talent on that defensive line out of Florida over the last few years, stretching back even to the Bosa brothers, and you may remember them. But they've pulled a lot of talent out of the South over the years on the defensive line. What did you see out of Jaden Jackson, and where do things stand with him in Ohio State right now?
Yeah, you got to really put a lot of pressure on defensive tackle recruiting. What happens if Ohio State has a really good year and Mike Hall and Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton all decide to go to the draft? You pick up Tywone Malone, who's somebody who has multiple years, so that gives you some more depth there. But you got to keep grinding and recruiting guys who are coming out of high school who have 5 years to play for, and Jaden Jackson fits that bill. found out originally from Indiana. I didn't really know where he came from. I knew he didn't like come up in like IMG school district because that doesn't exist, so he had to come from somewhere. But I was very impressed. Ohio State had two coaches at the IMG spring scrimmage or whatever they called the event. I mean, a lot of schools were there, but Larry Johnson was one of the two coaches there, and I know that Larry is sold on Jaden Jackson. It was a very scripted type of event, maybe even more scripted than Ohio State's spring game in a lot of ways. But Jaden is not the tallest kid, but I mean he's every bit of 3 bills, and he's violent on the inside, and he's going to do that dirty work, and he's going to be the guy that's going to have to sit there and take on blockers and. These defensive linemen these defensive tackles are going to be the ones that let the edge rushers get the glory and let them eat. And that's something that I talked to Jaden about in our interview. And he said, yeah, I mean, sometimes being a D tackle is not the sexiest position, but it's important. And I think his recruitment is important. And I like Ohio State's position right now.
All right, so you guys got to talk to, that was 4 guys you talked to while you were down there. You guys talked to about 24 players overall. So give me maybe someone who just sort of, when you're looking back, this is one of the guys who really jumped out to you, and that might be, hey, this guy's way better than I thought he was going to be. Hey, Ohio State's maybe in a much more advantageous position than I thought they might be, or just, hey, this kid is really impressive. Who was one player you saw during your trip who really just kind of jumps out to you for one or more of those reasons?
We talked about this going into the interview, and I've been sitting here thinking the whole time, I'm like, all these kids have been really impressive. It's just a testament to what, the caliber of kid that Ohio State is recruiting. So, I mean, all these kids have been really impressive. So I can't differentiate on that. I'll say Nicholas Rodriguez, the linebacker out of St. Thomas Aquinas, because I'm going to try and keep it here as week 2, as we talked at the end of week 1, and I want to have a little bit of a line of separation between the two interviews. He's not the biggest guy, but a lot of databases had him listed at 190. He's 215 right now. I talked to some guys around the Aquinas program who said that this guy, he can pretty much cover anybody on the field. I mean, whether it be a tight end, whether it be a receiver, whether it be a back. I mean, he is a really impressive guy, and it was a really good interview too. So I really enjoyed talking with him. Of course, he's in a position of, what does Ohio State linebacker recruiting look like? Where's like a Sammy Brown, who we did not get to talk to on this trip? Where does he fit in? Where does Kingston from out west? He's got Ohio State in his top 3. How does that? I mean, how deep is Ohio State going to go at linebacker? So is there going to be a spot for Nicholas Rodriguez? And on Friday he released a top 5, a top 6, and Ohio State is on that list. I think it was a top 5, and I knew Ohio State was going to make the list. He told me so much in the interview, but I think it's going to be really important to see what happens June 2nd when he takes his official with teammate Jordan Lyle to Ohio State, and kind of what the messaging is. But I was very impressed with him, but that's not to say that I wasn't impressed with pretty much everybody I talked to. I mean, certainly there's some kids that are going to be a little camera shy, a little nervous once the little red light goes on the camera or whatever. But pretty much every kid that I talked to was fantastic.
And if you want to watch those interviews, they are all posted at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. You can get to know some of these players, put some faces to some names on guys who could be Buckeyes of the future, starting as early as next year, or in Malachi Toney's case, 2026, which, boy, I'm not ready to start thinking about the 2026 recruiting class just yet. But if you are, you can find all of those at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. And then lots of insight and analysis, written content at buckeyehuddle.com, lots of stuff that's free on the front page, and then even more stuff exclusive to our members on the Huddle board there. You can sign up today at buckeyehuddle.com, get access to all of that great stuff. And, just because Southern Swing is wrapping up does not mean that the recruiting coverage is done. There was another Massillon 7-on-7 camp on Friday that Mark Givler was up at. We have all of Ohio State's summer recruiting camps coming up in the month of June, plus all of those official visits. Alex Gleitman on Friday just dropped a really, really great look at the 5 big recruiting storylines for Ohio State heading into the summer. That's exclusive to our members. Lots of great content all there at buckeyehuddle.com. So if your membership might be coming up at another site, maybe think about making a switch. Come on over, join us, join all the insiders, all the staff, all the fun at buckeyehuddle.com. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.